Okay, yeah, and there we go. We can just carry on. So
Cool.
yeah, share your screen and let's have a look at the pictures.
All right, let's look at these pictures. Let's
Yeah.
put them on full screen here.
So what do you make of it? I mean, in general.
Yeah, so you know, I'd messaged you about this earlier. I think that there's something to be said about, I mean, Josh talked about, extensively about the trickster element. Of course, we were there with George P. Hansen. Um, and stepping back for a second, we could have a longer discussion about this if you'd like, but I have some very particular feelings or thoughts about the nature of documentation, especially photographic or video representation of the phenomena or anomalous activity in general.
Mm.
One of my favorite cases of all of this comes from over where you are, which is the Cottonley fairies. And I think that as an archetype for documentation and representation of the phenomena is fascinating. So we can certainly circle back around to that and talk about that, but let's dive into this a little bit more. So this
Yeah.
was from the second night we went down there. So I'll speak really quickly about the first night. So the first night when we went down um, with George and Elizabeth and there's a number of other Josh was there, Tim was there, you of course, and Chris. Josh in the interview you did with him, or in the interviews you collected, and he talked about this idea of when we walked down that path, that there was what he almost saw as like a flashlight pointing out in the woods toward him. And I was standing
Yeah.
next to him when that happened, and I saw that as well. To me, I interpreted it as almost like a pinpoint light, so I could see it like as a small pinpoint flashlight, kind of pointing out because it was so bright. I mean, that was kind of the thing about this phenomena
Mm.
is it was very bright. Um, and my initial reaction was it was very visceral. Uh, I was overwhelmed emotionally by it. And
Yeah.
that was, yeah, my first thought was, or not thought even, it was just this very kind of intense emotional reaction to seeing these lights that really did seem to be coming out or emanating and did seem to be very responsive to the singing and
Hmm.
that we were doing into the woods. And I think also the general joviality of that group, because it seemed to change based on who was there too. There was that aspect of this.
Yeah.
So then I started thinking this first evening before I took these photographs, I started thinking, are we just looking at fireflies? Which has come up in some of these other discussions as well, right? That you've had with
Yeah.
various people. And my mind kept oscillating between these two things. But as I started thinking about that, I remember getting quite scared. And I'm someone who's not typically scared of going into the woods by any means. I spend a lot of time outside. I do not spend a lot of time in the dark in the woods at night, though. I will say that. So there was that aspect of this as well. Um, and yeah, so it was left that first evening kind of in that in between space, that liminal space between feeling very intensely that something was happening, but also not totally certain on what exactly that was. And I'm someone who loves the experience and relishes that. And so my inclination that first night was not to photograph because I think sometimes the camera can get in the way of having that or being present with an experience. Okay, so then we go down the second evening, and that's when I decided to bring my camera down and see if we could take some photographs or to see what this was. So I think there was, a little bit of discussion, I think, amongst the group. I think Chris maybe touched on this in one of the earlier interviews that you did. And then also, I think this was playing on my mind, I'm sure most of you others, was is this just a psychic phenomenon? Is this a group hallucination? Is this a group, experience that we're having psychically? And I would say, like, one thing then that the photographs can prove definitively is that there was indeed something physical that was able to be captured by a camera happening, right? So that I
Definitely
would
light. Yeah.
say, yeah, so that I would say we can ground there. Like, if we wanted to say something definitive about this, that there was a light phenomena that indeed was registering with a photographic device.
Hmm.
Um, so the series of photographs I took, and you feel free to, ask me questions if you wanted to ask any like technical things or anything like that. I'll answer those to the best of my
One
ability.
sec, someone's just knocked on the door. Hang on,
Oh,
one
sure.
minute.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry.
You're totally fine. Heard a young voice. I'm sure your attention was needed.
It's all going on.
Yeah. So like I was saying, technically, if you have any questions, feel free to, jump in at any point, and I'll answer those to the best of my ability. I have 9 photographs here that I thought we could discuss. I divided them up because I did 3 different exposure settings, one at 2.5 seconds, one at 10 seconds, and one at 30 seconds. One
Wow.
issue I would have with this is that the control mechanism is not really there, in that, yes, the situation didn't change. As far as I know, no other lighting sources are present during any of this. It was all in this one evening. However, this is not on a tripod. I
Mhm.
literally had the camera around my neck, just sitting on my chest, and I was trying to stay still, but moved a little bit, as is evident in the some of the rendering that happened when the image was captured, which I can see.
Yeah.
Um, so this is one of the 2.5 second ones. We'll start there. And this one, I would say, almost does look reminiscent of a firefight trail if you were to see it.
Hmm.
Although I have been spending time outside since we got back. I think probably a number of us have, because we have fireflies here where I live in Virginia, and they don't quite act like this. So, anyways, we can go back to this. So, but it almost looks like in this rendering, but it's a little hard to say again because it wasn't a static camera position per se. Was
Yeah.
I moving a little bit, right? Like there's a little bit of an unknown there. Okay. And then I would say that this one is somewhat reflective of that as well. So
Hmm.
I think we're kind of at that first point that I touched on, which is that there is some kind of light phenomena happening that is able to be seen beyond just with our psyche, right?
Yeah.
Now, this is the last 2.5 second photograph. It's very minimal, right? There's just this one small
Wow.
dot right here, one yellow dot. And I would say the color is also interesting, right? So color does change based on the length of a photograph. It can shift a little bit. You can get some color shifts. So
Hmm.
these shorter exposures, I would say, would probably, in my estimation, would render the color the most accurate. And I only say that too, that this is how I saw them. I saw them as bright yellow lights. They were maybe a
Yeah.
little bit more white, but I would say this is pretty close approximation for me, how I
Yeah.
noticed them, because I know that some people saw a little bit of a spectrum of color with all of these. What
Yeah.
I find interesting about this one is that it's a single point and it's a circle.
Mm.
There's something there that is kind of striking to me. I can't tell you exactly what that is per se, like a differentiation between something like this, where there's this
Yeah.
streaking that almost implies movement or something like that, and then this static like this. So
It must have
I
been
think,
pretty static, for it to show up like a pinpoint like that, pretty much.
yeah, yes. And so to me too, I don't know if you saw this or what in terms of your experience of this, but I definitely, and I think this is where that question of was this fireflies or was this, and I think probably the most anomalous answer would be that it's both, right? I
Mhm.
think that,
Yeah.
I love to fall into that space with all of this. But in some ways, I think it also does mirror what I saw, which is that I saw lights that kind of looked like they were moving, but then I saw ones, and these were the ones, and actually even talking about this, I'm getting chills. The ones that seemed the most static, that almost seemed to come, a little closer and farther. Those were the ones that I definitely had the most questions about. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, and so what else would I say about that? I think the other observation I had too, that would be very difficult to capture photographically per se is the we talked about like how when we got closer to the edge of the swamp or whatever that was kind of in front of us, that
Mhm.
threshold, they seem to also recede. And then as we step back, and so I do remember that it seemed that they kind of kept the same proximity to us, which also was quite interesting. I also, upon reflection, was thinking about the fact that I don't, even though the scale didn't change for me, like I didn't see something, some people were talking about larger, maybe almost like golf ball size or tennis ball, like larger scale. I seem to remember
Mhm.
only seeing kind of pinpoint, but reflecting upon that, when they were in the distance, they seemed to be the exact same size. So there was
Yeah.
that aspect of this as well, right?
Mhm.
Which speaks to some kind of variation, of course, but there's something there, I think. Okay. So let's move
Yeah.
in. So these are the 10-second ones. So there I have three 10-second ones to show you.
Mm.
You can see that there's a lot more light coming out now in the break in the tree coverage that was above the canopy
Yeah.
there. And that there's more color coming through now because of that longer exposure, kind of showing, demonstrating a little bit of the effect of a longer exposure. Um, and again, 10 seconds, and you're still getting, now you have two pinpoints of light, right?
Mm.
I'm very much moving the camera here. You can tell that the camera's moving. And so, but these are pretty static, these
Yeah.
two. And then there's also this one up here that's a little hidden up in the breakage right here that has a little bit more of a white kind of tinge to it.
Yeah.
Um, and this is pretty interesting. Again, I can't, it's not definitive necessarily of anything, but it
Mhm.
does speak to the intensity of the light and
Yeah.
also that there were static. Um,
That's really amazing, that
as
one.
yeah, this is one is one of my favorites. The
Yeah.
I mean, there's almost like an eye aspect to it too, as well, right? There's
Like, yeah, two creepy eyes, cartoon
yes,
eyes. Yeah.
there is that part coming up. And as you take a long exposure, um, one thing that happens is like if you had a light source and you just flashed it very quickly like that, it
Mhm.
might not be captured in a long exposure because you're then increasing, you're continuing to expose. So it would
Yeah.
have to be pretty bright actually to do that, or the duration would have to be a bit longer. So this isn't necessarily, again, answering anything specific, but it is demonstrating some kind of characteristics visually of what was
Yeah.
happening.
Interesting.
And again, I would say these ones are the most reminiscent of what I was like seeing and I would say emotionally reacting to the most.
And these look like they're quite high up in the trees as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, they're not low
Absolutely.
down.
This would have been up in the canopy, so this would have been above our heads, essentially.
Mm.
Again, I couldn't say exactly what that would be, and I'm already plotting next year, of course, and
Yeah.
bringing the tripod and having, the actual, and also I think photographing during the day, like choosing a position, photographing during the day in the exact same position with the exact same lens, so that you could start to scale these things and start to
Mm.
see proportionally, that could
Yeah.
be interesting as well.
Could be.
Here's another 10-second exposure. This one is showing multiple, I'm what I would interpret as multiple light sources down in the bottom. And then again, something here where it also is we're getting, instead of a streak here, down at the bottom where you have that one line almost, you are definitely getting one, two, three, four, five delineated circles that are
Yeah.
happening right there. There's an issue of focus here as well. So, in classical orb photography, when I look at a lot of orb photography, there are certain orb photographs that I would say are distinctly of something. And then there are other ones that look like it could be a focus issue with dust in the air or some other kind of artifact that is just out of focus, right, in the photograph.
Yeah.
Um, so there is something there too, right, to be said, like, is this a focusing issue or is this a light? Because focusing in the dark, there's not really a great way to do that besides distance
Yeah.
focusing. So, um, and then this is the last 10-second one. And again, we're seeing almost what going, I just mentioned an orb, like a classical kind of orb almost image in some ways here. especially
Right.
this kind of movement down here. Now, this almost looks like it would be a movement from the camera, but again, we're seeing this really intense bright light right down there as
But
well.
if this was a 10-second exposure, that light has to have been there for like 10 seconds.
Maybe not 10 seconds, but I would say
Quite a
definitely
while.
more, maybe a second or two, maybe more than a couple of seconds. That would be my estimation. Again, I can't give you I don't want to give you a strong definitive answer on that because it's a guess to a certain degree.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that's what I also remember. I don't remember, the lights were going on and off, but they were staying there for a little bit. It wasn't as if they were just like flashing at us necessarily.
No, no.
Um, and that's, again, being here, now there may be a different species of firefly up there, but noticing in the yard here in Virginia, watching the fireflies even last night, they flash. They flash and
Mhm.
then they move and they flash. And also I
Yeah,
could distinctly see granted it was more at dusk, so we were in, pretty much darkness. I could also see the firefly itself, the physical, insect
yeah,
moving, right? And one other aspect of this that was interesting on the last evening I was down there, and we might have done this a little bit when we were taking the photographs too, when I had a bit of a higher powered flashlight, but I was more doing this the last evening when I wasn't taking photographs, was if there was a flash, I would immediately go with the flashlight on it to see if there was some evidence of something there,
yeah.
specifically like a firefly, and we could
Right.
never see anything,
Mm.
which was interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know what to say about that, but that was kind of striking that we were not able to see any evidence of any bugs, but we did see other bugs flying through the air. So there was something there.
It's very strange. I remember when I only saw fireflies for the first time last year in Lilydale, and me and Chris were sitting out on the porch of Charlie's house, and the fireflies were kind of like coming, they came up around us, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. But you could see the bug there.
Yep.
And the other time we saw them was down by the side of the lake, when we were having a barbecue there last year, and they were all like low down in the grass. And again, you could see them, and they were coming right up close to us, like they were around our feet. Whereas these ones in the woods, yeah, they always seemed to be at a distance.
Yes.
They were never very close by.
Yes. Although there was that one tale or story that we were told from a prior year where someone who was mocking it in
Yeah.
some way or in some ways making fun of whatever was happening had one approach him very close, and that apparently created a very strong fear reaction in that person.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I think we were told that it actually the light actually illuminated him, which speaks again to an intensity of light that's slightly different than what you would expect from a normal firefly in
Definitely.
that
Yeah.
situation. All right, so moving forward. So here's one of the 30-second exposures. You're starting to see a lot more of the film grain here, so that's why you're getting more of that like noise, or it's not film, it's digital, so
Mm.
digital noise essentially. Um,
Yeah.
you know, I can't say this is revealing anything else, or there's no, something else going on here. Although I will say we're doing an exposure that's 3 times as long now, and we're still almost, you know, it's a variation in exposure, but that it's still occurring. That it's still here on, it's still manifesting on the image. And then
Mm.
here's one more 30-second exposure. And you can see, right, we were down there in complete darkness. What's amazing about a 30-second exposure at this point is it almost looks like daybreak up here or something like that, right? So it's just gathering all the light, that it can. And you're still getting up here a little, some of the almost orbish light coming through. And then I would say this one I would say is the last one I'll have, I would say is extremely characteristic of what I would say of like trying to do anomalous photography or the phenomena. So this is the last image I took. It's a 30-second exposure. It was there. All right. I can't explain this photograph. This one is actually completely white, which would speak to that it was an overexposure, that it was completely blown out, although it's a 30-second exposure. All right. which could mean that the flashlight was turned on. I don't know. That could be like what it was that, because that was so bright that it blew it out. However, when I lowered the levels, and I should say none of these photographs before this I didn't edit at all. That's raw out of the camera. So just whatever the camera itself captured. This one, I just decreased the density of the image, and this is what came out.
It's
Um,
really weird.
it's weird, but it's not descriptive. This is the thing, right? To me, if I were to guess what this was, if
Mm.
somebody just showed me this photograph cold, I would assume that there were multiple light sources and
Yeah.
that the camera was moving over them and maybe like it drifted up or down or something, and that's why they're carrying, through, like, the same form is going up and down. But
Yeah.
it's strange, but I think that what it does is it might potentially give the illusion of something happening, but it's not showing anything. So for some people, this could be very descriptive. For me, in
Hmm.
some ways, it'd be one that I would be, and I wanted to show it in this context for the conversation, but
Yeah.
I would be the most hesitant to ever show this one with the other ones because of that,
Yeah.
because of the fact that it speaks to something, but you can't know. And that's again where this trickster element, I think, really comes in, right? Where
Mm.
I think someone could capture something like this as evidence of something, right? But
Yeah.
and because it's visually, it's pretty striking. It's a pretty striking image. It's very different than the other ones. There's a color
Mm.
spectrum going on too, which I can't quite explain. There's some red, there's some blue, there's some white, right? There's like there's things going on. And so I could see wanting to latch on to an image like this. Um, but to me, I would say I'd be the most hesitant to say that this one falls into the category of what we were actually experiencing.
That's it. It doesn't look like what we saw.
No,
Um, it looks like, yeah, like blurry kind of trails, but it gives the impression of lots, like a density of these whatever these lights are,
yeah,
much more than we can actually physically see.
right. And
Which is
but it's so different than the other ones, right? The other ones, there's almost a consistency, even in the exposure variations, there was a consistency across them, right? Where this one
mm,
is anomalous in that way, that it stands
it's
out from the
amazing.
others. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
It also makes
So
me think of like the skull experiment and all those kinds of things. The
yes,
kind of weird photos that they got. It's got that
right.
otherworldly kind of vibe.
Right. So I think, going back to where we started this conversation in some way around, I brought up the Cottingley fairies. And in
Hmm.
America, I would say I've kind of been talking about how the Patterson Gimlin film, which is this very, archetypal Bigfoot film, right, from the 60s,
Yeah.
that's our Cottingley fairies. I kind of have been
Oh,
like expressing it like that.
I like that.
Because because in some ways I think this photograph actually is representational of that in some way, where it might be more descriptive of some of the emotional resonance that someone might have had with this experience, or it might
Mm.
be more descriptive of something unknown, but yet it's
Hmm.
less descriptive visually. And so, what really fascinates me about the Cottonley Fairies, about the Patterson Gimlin film, is there a litmus test for the viewer very often, right? Where the belief factor starts seeping in. And in
Hmm.
some ways, it doesn't matter if it's a forgery or if it's, a real representation of something that was observed, that it's about, an experience. And so
Yeah.
the other aspect of that I find really compelling is, very often I see across the board, especially when it comes to UFO photographs, where there's a number of famous case instances of of forgeries that were later found out to be in fact fabricated. But
Hmm.
to me, that doesn't negate the fact that perhaps that person had a very real experience at the beginning, and that they were
Hmm.
trying to create some facsimile of that experience, right? And
That makes
manifest
sense.
it,
Yeah.
and so with painting or drawing, I saw a fantastic exhibition at the College of Psychic Studies in London last fall when I was visiting
Mm,
over there. And it was called The Medium is the Message. And it was primarily channeled art, and it was drawings and paintings. And
mm,
one thing that's distinctly different from a photograph and a painting is that you don't necessarily question the authenticity of a painting because it's not presenting itself as anything but a painting. Where a photograph, we
yeah,
tend to look at it as evidence, right? Or as a document of something happening exterior to us.
mhm,
And one of the lines, I'd have to go into my notes to see exactly which person spoke towards this, but they asked the spirit that they were in communication with, one of these artist mediums, is it you or me who is, doing these drawings, these automatic drawings? And the spirit answered to them, uh, no matter what, it's always your hand. And so I think that there is like with photography or video for that matter, there's always a device in between you and what's going on, right? So there's always like a physical technical device happening between you and that phenomena as well. And so I think that
yeah,
there's something there that I think that speaks to, yeah, perhaps like there always being an unknown around this stuff. People are, I think there's like always this question of like, where are the pictures of Bigfoot? Where are the pictures of UFOs? Right? And
yeah,
they're everywhere. Just go online, they're everywhere, right? But then people want to be like, what's real? Right. And in that way, I think it demonstrates that photography or video will never prove this. It will never prove kind of the phenomena in itself. This is my take on it, of course.
yeah, yeah,
But yeah, I think there's an element there of that. And I think that that impulse, perhaps of the young women who did the Cottingley Ferry photographs or, the Patterson Gimlin film. Again, I'm not making any suppositions about that yet, right? Although I don't know if you know there's a
yeah,
documentary supposedly coming out, right, about that film. So that that the photographer or the camera almost being the trickster, right? Like it almost becomes the device of the trickster, right?
yeah,
To like to then manifest the phenomena, but then also create a distinct question around its validity and if it's actually in fact real. So
exactly. It's got built-in mistrust, hasn't it? And especially
yes,
now,
yes,
I think, early in the 19th century, people really did trust photos, but very quickly they became untrustworthy.
right.
Uh, the other thing I think that's interesting about the Cottingley analogy is I hadn't really thought it before, but how similar actually it is to what we were physically doing and going down. We were literally going down the back of people's houses, and they past the bottom of their gardens and down to this boggy, wet kind of area. And I know in the Cottingley story that they went down to the beck down there. And that's where they had their experiences. And I've long been thinking that there's something special about the kind of the bottom of the garden and that kind of place. So it's not quite in the realm of humans, and it's not quite in the realm of wilderness. So it's a place of encounter. And even if they did completely fake those photos, which they may well have done, the Cottingley girls, what they were doing was still an expression of something much, much, deeper, that about this particular place that they were in and about the kinds of things that might happen in a place like that. So they were playing out a kind of a story, and I think we were also playing out a story as well, with our
Yes.
little excursion into the woods.
Yes. Yeah, and that's I think you articulated that really well, that's what I think that those young girls were really communicating with those photographs more than anything, as opposed to a document. I think that that narrative was taken, and I don't want to get into the history of that because I know you could talk about it probably much more than I could. But that there was that time lapse between the initial ones and the later ones, and the intention and those kinds of things. And I think especially the early ones, the intention of those early ones, in my mind, because they weren't necessarily meant, at least my understanding, for public consumption was
Mm.
to, yeah, manifest an experience, a real experience that they were perceiving or having. And that was primarily what they were
Mm.
about. But I think that then this onus gets put on top of it as a photograph to be real or to prove something.
Yeah.
But one observation I would say about photography is the first foundations of photography, the earliest images are I would say like black and white, right? That they're not totally black and white, all because there was some spectrum of color with some different processes, but it was not full color, right? Which is how we see. So immediately photography is an abstraction, right? From the get-go. And that gets lost as it gets more, closer to how we see. But I think that we describe the world with photographs. Like if I wanted to show you a picture of my dog, right, I would show you a photo. Right? If I wanted to tell you what my dog looked like, I'd just show you a photograph, right? And so we kind of that there. That's like again, that's this like element of it where it shifts and oscillates back and forth between representing something and truly like demonstrating what it looks like, right? And that in some ways I like these photographs because of that, right? I don't know if we go next year and we get a little more serious about it and it's, more structured and those kinds of things. I mean, the unknown being will it manifest, right?
Hmm.
Will it manifest? It's always there. And then what will they look like? Will they have that characteristic that they have now that I find charming in some way and also quite like reminiscent of what it felt like to be there.
Yeah, no, they do. They do capture something of the vibe of it. I find this whole thing really interesting. And I mean, when I first saw them last year, I thought that would be it, and probably I would never see something like that again. And then this year, was able to go back multiple times, and each time, um, and even with the idea of fireflies, in my mind, which is always there, but each time, it was a magical experience, and it was kind of mystifying. So I think that it might be a perpetual mystery, like an actual mystery, like the feeling of mystery as well. And I'm not sure whether it can be worn out. And maybe there might be times when we could go there and nothing will show up, and that will feel quite disappointing. But then the next time when it does show up, it'll probably feel equally as mysterious. So I feel quite good about it, and the mystery keeps kind of deepening in lots of ways.
Yeah. Well, just to that point, Jack, I went down 4 nights. All right. So the 4 nights I was there, I went down each evening. And after the first night and then the second and third, I was kind of like, in my mind, they were fireflies, right? That was kind of still there. I was like, it's the fireflies. I was like, we're just tricking ourselves or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's hard because you are around people who are very genuine, who have had, we were around some people who had had multiple, like yourself, who had had multiple years of this, right? So you don't want to be dismissive, right? And think, oh, well, I know what this is. But the last night, in my back of my mind, I kind of said to myself, it was the warmest day. And so in some ways, I was like, well, maybe this more will come out then or something like that, thinking about the actual insect or the firefly. And I said, if it's quiet tonight, that's going to really, in some ways, solidify me that there might be something going on. And the last night we went down, I don't think you were there. I believe, were
No.
you there? I don't think you were there the last night I went down. Um, it was much quieter, like
Mhm.
much, much quieter.
Yeah.
And I left that evening thinking there's something going on. That in some ways, that's what convinced me was that
Yeah.
there was this variation and that the fact that it did seem that the group that I was with, that the energy was different, not that it was like better or worse or anything like that. It was just different. It was just a different energy. Did seem to have a palpable effect on what manifested. So,
Mm.
and I kind
Yeah.
of like what you said earlier too about the space, right? Like the parallels between the Cognitive fairies where we were in between in some ways the
Yeah.
natural world and the human built landscape. And if I remember correctly, that first evening, um, someone said, you don't cross the bridge because there was a small little bridge over a little stream. And they
Yes.
said, whatever you do, don't cross that bridge. Like that was the threshold, not to
Yeah.
cross over. Um, And in some ways, that was the way to descend deeper into the woods, right? Like that was where you almost like might go deeper into the woods. So I couldn't help but
and
recall
get
that when you
lost. Yeah,
mentioned that.
exactly.
Yeah.
No,
Yes.
and exactly. But and that made me just think of it again about the fairy tale kind of nature of the whole thing, and thresholds in between kind of spaces, fairy lights, singing songs in the woods, singing nursery rhymes. uh, it's very magical. Yeah.
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
here's a question for you. Because I have seen a few in my life, a few other instances of strange lights. One of them was in a séance, and the lights I saw were behind the medium in the cabinet. It was a red light séance. The medium was in a cabinet, and it was dark in the back. And I saw these little flashes of light behind, which are kind of similar to the lights that we saw, but I really felt like they were hallucinations. They were kind of subjective things. Like it was my phosphenes or entoptics or
Hmm.
whatever it is
Right.
going off. And so I kind of trusted those lights as, hallucinations, but as a genuine, strange experience. And then years later, I saw another medium who had these lights, which were really va blatantly kind of fake. They were like torches, like torchlights. They were so kind of physical that it couldn't have been anything other than fake. And so that's like a spectrum there. And then a couple of other things that I remember seeing. There was once years and years ago, and there was a power cut, and all the lights went out, and all the street lights went out. We live in a little village, and it's pretty dark anyway. And so when the street lights go out, it's like pitch dark. And I was with my friend, and I said, and he'd not long kind of learned how to drive. And we were like, oh, this would be a great night. This is pretty me trying to convince him. This would be a great night to go out and see if we can spot any UFOs because there's no lights around, no street lights or anything. So we got in the car and we drove up to the Bala Road. There was a famous UFO crash up there in 1974. Anyway, we weren't really thinking about that. And we pulled over on the side of the road and looked down into the valley below, and it was totally pitch dark. And then we saw this little light start up in the woods down below us, a bright light. And it could have been, it could have been a torch, it could have been someone, I don't know. But it was late at night. There was a power cut and there was no other sources of light. And then it seemed to start to move towards us, and I freaked out. And I said, we're going to go now, get out of here. We drove away, and that was the end of it. So, in some ways, the quality of the light, the brightness of it, and the fact and the woodland kind of vibe of it was similar to what we saw, but it must have been much bigger because we were high up on the hillside
Mhm.
looking down on it. But it was a very bright, intense light. And then the other one I'll mention was again with my friend, and we were out again one other night walking through the village, and we saw an actual fireball, and it was like a meteorite or something, or some kind of, but it was really big, and we could see it sort of turning as it was coming down and burning up, and that was amazing. But that was so, I could clearly tell what that was. It was like a
Yeah.
piece of rock burning up, and I could really see it. So there's a whole bunch of different kinds of lights. Some of them are quite anomalous, and others are quite easy to explain. Have you seen any other kinds of lights?
Yeah. When before I can tell you real quick, but before I say that, you're making me think too, because I wanted to mention this earlier. You had mentioned, I think in the first video for this, you had put together about that Reddit article you found.
Oh yeah,
And I believe you said it was from 2011, if I remember correctly.
I did. I mean, I might be wrong. We have to check
Okay.
it, but the
Yeah.
link's there. Yeah,
Right. So, but regardless, the fact
yeah,
that that account that you read, when you read it, I was like, that's exactly what it was. I mean, it was all verbatim, basically the
yeah.
experience, which I found fascinating that aspect of it too. But yeah, so the one encounter, which I kind of have always considered one of like the seminal moments in my life, is I used to live, this is about 22 2 years ago now. I was living in northern Idaho, here in the United States, so in the West, and was standing out on the porch. My family has a cottage out there on a lake, and was standing out on the back porch facing the lake. I was actually on a phone on an old landline, like a wireless landline phone.
Yeah.
And it was the evening, and behind me, or in the west, in the Pacific Northwest, there's really tall pine trees.
Mm.
So they're probably like 80, 100 feet tall behind me. And I'm standing there, and all of a sudden I get a sense of like a light behind me up above the trees. And so I
Mm.
look back, and I thought that it was a helicopter spotlight pointing down at me, is what I initially thought. And I was like, that's weird. Right?
Yeah.
And then I look, and I'm looking at it, and I then realize it's completely silent.
Mm.
And it's not a spotlight, it's actually a large ball of light. And it's a large golden orb, big. Now, the tricky thing about lights is, as you just kind of described, seeing, looking down into the valley and seeing the light, and even what we were just describing here with our experience in Lilydale, scale is really problematic, right? Because it's not fixed like that necessarily. And so I remember it being quite large. And but it was right above the tree. So it could have only have been maybe 150, 200 feet above me. And it
Mm.
went drifted over my head, and then it went down completely silently. And then it went down into the bay in front of me above the water. And then it drifted out across the lake, and the house looks out down the lake, and then it goes around a bend. And
Mm.
it went out around the bend, just hovering above the water, and then it just went around the bend and disappeared.
Mm.
Now, I've reflected on this a lot.
Yeah.
And what it was at the time, I don't remember what happened with the phone call. Frankly, I think I might have just said I got to go or something like that. Honestly, I don't know. I remember I was living with my girlfriend at the time. I ran into the house, and I was like, "Did you see that? Did you see that?" She had not seen anything. And that was
Mm.
kind of the end of it. That was
Yeah.
basically it. And so it's only been in the last maybe I mean, it's been a little longer than that, but not as long where I actually would even tell this story to anyone. And then also have started to do my own introspection and looking back at that. And a few things have manifested out of that. One thing is I always thought it was a UFO event, right? And I kind of account that to, I would say, when I talk about this, I talk about the idea that I think in the United States, the UFO um, dialogue is it kind of dominates the conversation. And so a light in the
Yeah.
sky is like a UFO, but it wasn't a craft, right? It was a giant golden orb. That's what it was. So
Mhm.
there's that aspect of this. The other aspect is I was telling a friend about this, and he said, "Well, how long do you think this was?" And I was like, "Maybe like 30 seconds or a minute, something like that, from when I saw it to when it went around." And he goes, "Well, how far away is that other point?" And so I actually did the on Google Earth, I went and measured it.
Yeah.
And for the sake of this story, I'm going to have to be vague, which I know is not helpful, but I'm going to be a little bit. It's a couple of miles. It might be 6 miles. It's something like that. It's a distance.
Yeah.
And I measured it, and he said something like, well, if it was only that long, it would have had to be moving like 600 miles per hour or something like that. And you said that it was moving slowly. And so there is now this element potentially of lost time or something like that. I don't know. So that's another part of
Mm.
this.
Or
The
some
other
sort of
aspect of
time
this is,
dilation or
right. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
mm.
What was it then? Right? Like, what was this? Was this a giant orb? Was this a craft manifesting as an orb? Right? There's all of these questions. And one of the most beautiful explanations I've heard recently, I was speaking with somebody, and they said, perhaps it was you reminding you of who you really are or what you really
Yeah.
are, which I thought was like a very romantic and beautiful way of looking at it as well. So again,
Nice.
a light, right? It's like, what is it? Because it's so amorphous. It can have so many different representations and so many, uh, yeah, it can manifest in so many different ways for different people.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, brilliant. So do you think there's any parallels between the light that you saw then and these lights? Obviously, there's the size difference, but I do
Yeah,
also notice that a lot of these stories seem to take place with the trees, with water,
in water.
even the Cottingley fairies by the beck.
Yeah.
Uh, well, that's quite interesting.
Yeah. Oh, I think that, there's a strong connection to water. Absolutely.
Hmm.
I mean, you and I think both, I mean, I won't speak for you, but, knowing your work, I definitely relate my experiences with phenomena very intensely to nature and to the natural world. And that's kind of where I center myself in all of this.
Yeah.
Um, Interestingly, I saw a few mediums when I was in Lilydale, and this is really
Mm.
my first like real deep dive into meeting with mediums. And one of them said to me, "You've had an experience, like, an otherworldly kind of experience." I can't remember exactly how she contextualized it. Near water is what she said, and I
Mm.
said, "Yes, that's true. I have." And she said it came from below. And I was like,
Mm.
that's interesting. I was like, because I saw it as coming from above, but she said, yeah, I'm getting the strong sense that it was actually something that came from below. So
Mm.
that was kind of interesting as well.
Yes,
But
it
yeah, your
is.
question though about like, do I see a correlation between the lights? I would say there was the visual reaction I had initially with them.
Hmm.
I can't say that that was the same. It's far too long ago for me to remember exactly how I felt when I saw that other light. I remember being quite mesmerized, but not really fearful. I do remember that. I wasn't scared. And but yeah, to me, I would say that feel a little bit different. I mean, one of the more compelling aspects of this is that it was a group,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So I take that back. I did see one other light phenomena recently out in New Mexico with a large group of people as well. We were by White Sands, which is a military base, also a beautiful national park. Another great
Mm.
contrast,
Yeah,
but a very famous site for UFO activity. And a whole group of us saw these lights manifesting off of the top of the mountain for like an hour and a half, almost 2 hours. It almost got to the point where we had to leave. We were like, okay, well, this isn't stopping. We're just going to go. And now this is far away in the distance. But it's interesting to me, the group setting is pretty compelling as well, right?
Mm.
Multiple people having an experience at one time and seeing fundamentally the same ish, the same thing manifesting. There's something
Yeah.
there too, as opposed to
And
having
the,
a singular experience.
yeah, and the kind of the group excitement and all that seems to add something to it in a way.
Yeah.
It's more charged, more charged.
Yes. Yeah. And what we did was like whimsical almost, right? It was like fun and it was enchanting in some way going into the forest at night and yeah, and singing
Yeah,
into the darkness. There was something really lovely about all of that experience as well.
there was, yeah, and the mystery
Yeah.
persists.
Yes. Indeed. Indeed. See, the photographs answered nothing.
No, but they help to illustrate it.
Yes, they helped. I guess again, though, I take that back. I should say again, they do illustrate that something was happening. Hello, hello.
Alice,
How are you?
that's random, isn't it? Right, well, I think that's our cue to,
That's perfect.
draw
Perfect
to a
timing.
conclusion.
Well, yeah, thank you for inviting me on again, Jack. I really appreciate it. A pleasure to talk about this with you a little bit more and to be continued.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully, we'll have a few more adventures as well.
I'm sure we will. I have no doubt.
Stop recording.